Steven Gerrard's Aston Villa have just beaten Frank Lampard's Everton 2-1 in a game that was a bit of a slow burner really, with a late flurry of goals at the end. But there were some tactical ideas I think that were quite interesting to dig into, so let's take a look and see how these two teams set up. So we've got the lineups for both teams on the board in front of me. I think the really important thing to focus on is that both teams are trying to do things in wide areas that are interesting. So over here we've got Villa playing in a 4-4-2 diamond, so you've got a back four here, you've got a diamond here with Coutinho at the tip of that diamond, so it looks a little bit like a 4-3-3, but Coutinho is going to drop in and help out, and these two wider players are going to come in narrow in Watkins and Ings as well. But the important thing to note is that Villa have these two fullbacks who are both very good at getting forward in different ways. So you've got Luca Digne, who we know once he gets into these areas on the field, he can play these crosses into the box and can be really dangerous there, whereas Matty Cash is a bit more of an athletic player who likes to carry the ball into these dangerous areas on the diagonal into the goal as well. So Villa are actually going to try and get these two players into the game as much as possible. The thing to notice here is that Villa's team is actually set up very narrowly. So if we draw penalty box to penalty box over here, you can see that all of the Villa team are inside this narrow area, and it's only the fullbacks that are on the outside. So Villa are going to try and get their fullbacks forward, but in order to do that, because of the narrowness, they're going to have to respond structurally. And there's two things that they're going to do to achieve this. So the first one that you'll see is that often when the fullback goes down the line, the ball side central midfielder is going to just tuck in here and offer a little bit more defensive cover. The other thing that they can do is actually split the two centre backs, and you'll see Kamara, the holding midfielder, just dropping in between those two. So again, just pushing this fullback forward, but then offering defensive stability in the area that is left behind. But there's a problem here in that Villa are trying to get the ball into these wide areas, and they're going to try and get their players into the box as well. And the problem then becomes that with all of these players pushing forward, two of the central midfielders dropping out into wider or deeper areas, sometimes you'll be just left with a singular midfielder covering a huge amount of space. So this area then actually becomes quite vulnerable to Villa in possession. Let's take a look at Frank Lampard's Everton. They're lined up in a 3-4-3, which is what we've come to expect of Everton under Lampard. And what's really interesting about the 3-4-3 formation is that actually a lot of the things that are happening here are similar to what Villa are doing, but the other way around. So the 3-4-3 is actually very similar to a 4-3-3. And what we're doing then is just dropping one of the players into a back three, and then the structure stays the same. So you're taking a player from further forward in the field and dropping them deep, and then that allows these two players, the wing backs, to push forward. You're giving yourself cover at the back so that these two players can push forward and give you a little bit more scope in the wide areas. Now obviously taking a player from the midfield and dropping them deep means that you're taking a player from the forward line and putting them into the back line, and so Frank Lampard is thinking about how he can respond to that. So in possession, what we're going to see is Lampard trying to get one of his players in the back line further forward to make up for the original dropping back of a player into the back line. So let's imagine that the ball is across the back line here. What you will actually see is a bit more of a situational back four taking shape, and that means that Cody and Tarkowski are going to push wide. Holgate is now no longer needed here, so he'll push forward, which allows Patterson, the wing-back, to get really far forward, and McNeil can just come and sit inside into this sort of space here, which just gives them, again, a little bit more license to get forward. You've now got four players in your forward line. So again, thinking about ways of making those players more dangerous without compromising your structure. But again, what you need to remember is that in these moments, by moving your back line around like this, you are leaving yourself exposed in this central area here. So again, just two midfielders covering, and Villa can exploit that if they want. And so what we're seeing in this game is that both teams are trying to build up in wide areas, but actually in doing so, they're making structural decisions in possession that leaves them exposed in the middle. And in the end, this was what determined the difference between these two sides. And this shows up really well in the first goal, which was the goal which determined most of the game. The second goal wasn't scored until much, much later. But we've got it on the board in front of us here, and you can see this is Everton in possession. They're playing this way down the field. You've got your back three here, and we've already talked about how the back three is splitting into a functional back four. So here we've got Mason Holgate pushing into this space. There's Nathan Patterson able to get even further forward. We've got Dwight McNeil in the central space here, and this is a really nice structure. And as you can see, the ball is then on to play Dwight McNeil in the middle, who usually would be over here, but because Patterson's pushed up, he's able to move into a more central space, and this ball is going to go in here. So if we move the tape forward, the ball goes into McNeil and then he loses it. So if Everton had actually been able to exploit that situation better, they might have got a goal themselves, but instead you get this turnover, and now the structural decisions that Everton have made now become problematic for them. So Mason Holgate, the outside centre-back, is now much further forward in the play. We've got Doucouré here, who's one of the holding midfielders, and he is caught between having to close this player down, but also having to realise that these players are 2-on-2 at the back, so he has to drop back. He actually steps forward to intercept this player, but in so doing, the ball goes past him, and then Everton are in just a horrible position in transition. So now Doucouré is in a foot race with Coutinho. There's a huge amount of space between the Everton back three. Here's Holgate still out of that back three line, and there's just so much space here for Villa to exploit. Watkins plays the ball across, Ings takes a touch, Doucouré steps in, and Ings is able to play it sideways and then does a really nice finish across the keeper into the top corner. So that's just a really good example of how your possessional structure can actually leave you exposed to counter-attacks, and Villa got the better of Everton on this occasion, largely through Danny Ings' ability to finish, but also because of the structural problems that emerge from that. We can also see this happening in the second goal, and in this instance we have one of the central midfielders, this time Onana, pushing forward, being counter-pressed, and then again Everton leaving themselves exposed on the break, and again their possessional structure just leaving them vulnerable to the opposition counter-attack. So Onana loses the ball, and then you're in this horrible situation because what happens is that Villa have the ball here, and both of the central midfielders who are supposed to be covering the central space are behind the ball. And in this situation, Buendia is able to get forwards, and you're 2-on-3 with your back line. But again, Nathan Patterson is now the outside centre-back, and he's pushed up forwards in possession. So Buendia can run at those two centre-backs. They get too close together. He can feed the ball out to Watkins and then find this space here. And again, Patterson just off the speed of the play, so that when the ball comes into Buendia, Patterson is too far off the tackle. So this was a game that on paper looked like it would be determined by how the teams played in wide areas, but actually because both teams make certain structural decisions in possession, it meant that the central spaces were weakest. And Aston Villa won this game because they were the team who were better able to exploit the spaces that opened out there.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Daniel Taylor, Ollie Kay, Amy Lawrence and Rafa Honigstein. There are journalists dedicated to each Premier League team, so every fan gets the coverage they deserve, not just the big clubs. And you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.